The invoicing process as quick as possible. First thing, you got to get your treatment data and visuals. Either get that from Onyx or from Google Earth. Then get a blank invoice set up. So here I've got invoice number 5 that's blank. Well, there's information in it, we'll replace it. And calculator number 5, and I've got that blank. Then next you open the calculation tab and you start entering the data. So first we're going to start with the polys that we have. So the first poly that we have here, when I look at that shape, I find it over here on Google Maps, and that is going to be path number P2. And the miles I can tell from Onyx data is 0.82 of a mile. The next one that we have, all we're worrying about is perimeter mileage. So the next data set that we got was for P3, looks like. So P3 is 520 yards. So we'll convert that real quick. It's 0.3 miles. Okay, and then the next one we have is the duck. That's P4. The mileage is 0.75. The next one we have is P10. You can see that down here. P10. You might notice that the shapes that they did are actually quite different from what was supposed to be done. So I don't know if something was lost in translation, or when they got on site they just couldn't treat that way, but somehow there was a breakdown in communication. But that polygon is 0.72 miles of a perimeter. The next one we have is the one next to it, and that is P9, the big dog. Again, that looks a little different. P9 mileage is 1.29 miles, and that's all the data that we have for this invoice. Nate did include some shots of how that relates to other stuff, so we can compare that to the Google Earth on the right and make sure we're kind of all in the right place. All right, so once I have that, then I in the calculation table, or the calc tab, I enter the variant data. So for example, in the perimeters we don't have any variant data, so it's all grayed out. That's all we need to build the invoice. Now we go down to the next data field, the rolled area. We have the exact same polygon, so we just put P2, P3, P4, P10, and P9. Now according to Nate, these were all rolled, but they weren't cleaned up yet, so we're just going to bill for that. So now we can start the process over. You could do this all at once, do perimeter then acreage to save time, but the acres on this one are 14 point, I'm going to round up to, we're trying to keep it to 1 decimal point. P3 then is 2.6 acres. Sorry, yeah, 2.6 acres. Okay, and then the next one, P4, is going to be 10.8 acres. And then 12 acres for P10. And P9 will be 20, we'll just call that 29 acres. Or you could do 28.9, we'll do that. Okay, now at this point, you could do the densities, or you could come back to it. For right now, just to complete this process, we'll just go to the cleaned and say we're not going to bill for anything that was cleaned, as they're cleaning it up now, so we'll just leave that blank. So the next part is both the tree density and the slope. Now we don't need the density for the top portion of the invoice, only the bottom, but it's kind of nice to add that. So if we look at these in general, I would say, and it's an eyeball right now, right? But you've got really light, moderately thick, and very thick. So I would say this one's a moderate thickness because we do have some open patches. That's P9. I can see P10 right next to it. Looks like it's just a little bit thicker, but we'll probably go with a moderate for that too. Then we go up to, let's see, this ought to show us. The first two, I would say moderate on the first one, and on the second one, yeah, they both look moderate. Well, I don't see any open fields in the second one, so we'll go a little bit more thick on that one, or higher density. So P2 is moderate, and P3 we're going to go, actually, yeah, we'll go thick on that. And then P4, let's go down to P4. Little couple of light areas in there. I'd go moderate on that one as well. Okay, one thing you can do when you're done with this is check with the dozer operators, make sure that, you know, if they got into a patch of really, really thick stands, to make sure that you identify that. The next thing we're going to do is slope. This is a little more complicated. It's not too bad, so I'll show you how to do that. Basically, you go into Google Earth once you've got the polygons, and you go into, for example, P2, and I've drawn some lines here. I'll show you the lines really quickly. So there I've done kind of crisscross lines, if you can see it up there in the top. Probably a better example of that is down in P9, or P8, P10. So you can kind of see those crisscross patterns, okay? So once you have those lines drawn, I'll turn them off. You can go in and right-click and show elevation profile. Be sure to click it real quick because it zooms in. But I look at this elevation profile, and I can see the average slope is 5%. So I'll go back over here, and the one that we're doing, I believe, is P2. Yep, so we selected P2. So we'll go back over here to P2, and we'll say that our slope on average is 5%. Okay. Our max, however, on that slope is 27.4, if you can see that. So we'll add in 27. So not too bad. Very low slope for most of it on average, and a couple little steep spots. Okay, so the next one, P3. Looks like I don't have lines in P3. It was too small. So we'll leave P3 at the same. Then on P4, we'll go look at the slope of P4. Show elevation profile. All right, looks like I did that wrong. So P4 was actually this data. I apologize. So now we'll go do P2. Wow, I don't know what I did there. Sorry guys, stuff's moving around. Okay, so there's P4. Now what's interesting here is you can see the average is 11%, right? So that's not too bad on P4 of 11%. However, the maximum slope, look at this steep drop off. The max we're getting is 55% slope. So we'll drop that in. That's extreme, that's red. So that may indicate that we want to, 11 is at the bottom of this range, 10 to 15. If you were close to 13 or 14, let's say, and you had a couple of pretty steep drop-offs, you could bump that up to the next level justifiably. Okay, so we'll leave that where it's at. We're at the smaller range, but we got a couple of steep spots. Okay, so that was P4. P5 then, we'll go look at P5 here. Same scenario, show elevation profile. Click on it so it doesn't zoom out of hand. Average slope here is 7 with a max slope of, we'll call it 20. Okay, so we put in the 5 and the 20, or the 7 and the 20. So it's 20's decent, but because we're at 7 and we're kind of in that sweet spot of the moderate slope, we'll just leave that one where it's at. Then we go over to P9. Now we haven't done P9 yet. Let's see, did we get 10? Yep. No, we didn't. Again, with all this data, you gotta be really careful, make sure you do the right ones. So P10, this one's a little weird. You've got 11 average slope on P10, and then the max slope is 47. So again, we're kind of in the middle of that moderate slope. We do have a couple of steep sections on it. Visually, you can actually run your cursor over this in Google Earth and kind of see where those are. It'll move the arrow around for you. Let me get down to P10. So this will show us where on the poly was the steep drop off. So, you know, as they were roller felling, maybe they were going straight down the hill, so it wasn't too bad, but a little bit sketchy. Cleanup maybe a little bit of work, but this is where you can kind of call Daniel and talk through how much of a bear was the elevation on that one, and it's kind of a your call. So P9, just to show you how I do these, I'll create one. I already have a line selected, so it's going to keep the same properties. I go up to the top here and I click this little icon, add path. So once I'm adding a path here, okay. So once I go to add a path, I'll generally look at the flow and try to mimic where I think the majority of the slope is. Do a little crisscross pattern. Then I'll go the opposite direction just in case I've missed some cross slope. This should give you a good cross section of the slope for that polygon. Then I label it accordingly. This is P9 slope. Google Earth is very slow. Once you saved it out, right click on it, show elevation. That's where we get that metadata. So now, I mean, look at this thing. We got these huge drop-offs, right? As it went down that slope, there's a fading hill there. So it's a kind of good example of why we do those cross slopes, to see where the big drop-offs are. Okay, so the average slope is 17 and the max is 50 on P9. Average slope is 17, so it's a little bit steeper. And the max is 50, we said. So this is one where we're, 17, I guess it's right in the middle of that yellow band, so it might not be worth going to the upper one. But judgment call if you're talking to the crew, and there's so many kind of weird cross slopes on this one that it just made it difficult to either cut the perimeter or clean or anything. That may be worth just bumping it up to 20. So that now you're in, I guess I got to be 21. So now I'm in that orange category. Okay. All right. So once you're done with that, we don't have to do any cleanup again. We've added in all the variants that we need. So now we go to aggregate that data. So what you'll see here is on this same tab, there are some little calculators over here. So these are not auto-populating. You kind of have to manually do it, where I go in and say, how much of this slope, how many of these acres are light green? So I'll clear out the cells that are referenced, and I'll go in and say, okay, well, these acres are light green. Whoops, sorry, these acres are light green. 14 are, comma, 26 are, and that's it. So I've got my low density total acreage count. Then I go to my moderate, clear out those cells and say how many are moderate. Well, these two acreage fields are moderate. That gives me a count there. And then do I have any yellow? No, but I've got an orange. So we'll go ahead and just drop in that one value for orange. So what that's done is given me generally some aggregated data that I can apply to the invoice that I'll show you in just a moment. All right, so the next piece, and those should be auto-populating. We'll just double check that. The next